evening and welcome to the Waterville. My name is Kim Lindloff. I am the President and CEO of the Mid-Maine Chamber, and we were speaking earlier this evening about my history with the Chamber of Commerce. I have spent half of my, well, all of my adult life, half of my life as part of the Mid-Maine Chamber and the fabric of the Waterville community. I started out as a marketing assistant when I was 25 with the Mid-Maine Chamber, and then I became a board member when I got a job that paid real money. And more recently, I'm serving in its capacity as its president and CEO for over 17 years. So tonight, I'm excited to be here to celebrate Waterville's rich history. Hopefully, the lessons that we take away from our past will help to shape our future decisions here in Waterville. This book may surprise you. I've read Watervillage 2 or 3 times, and I've learned a lot about this city that I grew up in and I thought I knew everything about, and I really didn't. I think that you'll pull some information from this too that'll help you to understand where we come from. And I have to tell you that in addition to tonight, if you decide that you need extra copies of this book for Christmas gifts or whatnot, the Chamber is selling additional copies. Children's Bookseller on Main Street is selling them, and Common Street Arts Holiday Bazaar is also selling them. This book was published by North Country Press, which is a local company, which we're proud of, and we're truly grateful for its help in making this come to reality. I want to thank everybody tonight that made this happen. Mid-Maine Chamber's Board of Directors for commissioning Earl to write this book. I want to thank our partners that helped us support this event and get the word out about the book. They include the City of Waterville, Waterville Public Library, Waterville Creates, Waterville Historical Society, and Colby College. Thank you to Valley Beverage, who is our beverage sponsor for the reception tonight. And I want to thank and acknowledge Silver Street Tavern, because they worked with us to craft a menu tonight that featured French, Jewish, and Lebanese items to celebrate our rich history of family and friends that helped shape our community. Tonight is our 3rd event for the Chamber in the last 3 days, and I owe a debt of gratitude to my staff. Some of them are still locked outside because they're selling books, but we pulled off 3 incredible events this week consecutively, and I really want to thank Brittany, Kelly, and Patricia for all of their hard work and dedication to the Chamber and to the region. So next I get to introduce a couple of gentlemen. Well, I'm going to introduce one and then he's going to introduce the other. Two men that share my passion for Waterville and the surrounding area. But first, because I don't get to do it directly, I need to thank, for the Frenchmen in the room, you'll understand this, the rest of you won't. I get to thank my favorite Paston, who authored this book for us, and I want to thank his family for putting up with him over the last 3 years. He actually was writing this book on the beach in St. Croix, so he did not put this down. He's been very dedicated to making this happen. And I'm truly, truly grateful to Earl Smith for his dedication to bringing this book to reality. We've gotten to know each other a bit over the last 3 years, which is why I know that when I give him this gift from the bottom of my heart, he is going to treasure it. It's a book that I bought specifically with him in mind. Before he comes up here though, well, let me show you the book because, you know, Earl has opinions about stuff. So when I saw this advertised on TV, I thought, who better to have this book? And so when I mentioned it to his daughter, she said, oh yes, he's gonna love this book. So I'm gonna give this to Earl, but first I wanna introduce our incoming board chair, Dan Bernier. Dan and his family have deep roots in Waterville and a connection to Waterville that is just unparalleled by a lot of our families in this area. And I'm excited to have him leading the Chamber next year and want to welcome him up here today to introduce Earl. Dan?
Kim. Kim may need a mic. As the youngest of 7, I learned to be loud at a young age, so I can often get by without one. The Waterville area has a rich history. This area has been fortunate to have more than its share of industrious, creative, and gifted citizens who, over the years, built the community we live in. We can look back to people like Elijah Lovejoy, the abolitionist born in Albion and educated at Colby College. When I was a student at Waterville High School, Mr. Gonier made sure to devote a lesson to teaching us about Elijah Lovejoy. I wonder how many of our youth today would know who he was. Thanks to Earl Smith, this rich history has been captured in Waterville. For those of us who think we know a lot about Waterville history, there is much to be learned in Earl Smith's book. My grandmother was left an orphan by the typhoid fever outbreaks here in Waterville. I remember being told something about it having to do with drinking water. Until I read Earl Smith's work, I never really understood why Dr. Hill was held in such reverence. I was unaware of his work in helping end the typhoid fever here in Waterville and the creation of the Kennebec Water District to improve the quality of drinking water. Water Village reminds us that we can learn a lot from those who came before us, like when Democratic Mayor Harold Dubord and future Republican Mayor Chet Martin collaborated to keep Colby College in Waterville. Harold Dubord and Chet Martin understood that in Waterville, we may disagree with people, but they are still your neighbors. In reading Earl's work, I was reminded of how this community came together during the ice storm of '98. Neighbor helped neighbor, and the Colby Fieldhouse became an emergency shelter. Waterville owes Earl Smith our gratitude for putting together the book Water Village. As Waterville revitalizes, it is the right time to remember the rich history of this area. Thank you, Earl, for the work and for compiling the stories and characters that shaped Waterville. A native of Waterville, Earl Smith graduated from the University of Maine at Orono with a degree in journalism in 1962, when he began a 40-year career at Colby, where he served in numerous administrative capacities, including Dean of Students, Dean of the College, Secretary of the Corporation, and as assistant to 3 Colby presidents. He retired in 2002 and continues to serve as college historian. His public service includes elected terms on the Waterville City Council and the Board of Education, and as a representative to the Maine legislature. He served as a member and chair of the board of the Mid-Maine Medical Center and the Kennebec Valley Community College Foundation, and as a governor of the Colby Art Museum. He has received the Mariner Distinguished Service Award at Colby, the Bernard King Award at KVCC, and the Human Rights Award from the Elijah Lovejoy Society in St. Louis. Smith has written numerous articles for newspapers and magazines, and is the author of 6 books, including Mayflower Hill, A History of Colby College, and with the help of friends, A History of the Colby Art Museum. His novels include The Dam Committee, a comic Maine murder mystery, and its sequel, More Dam Trouble. His more recent novel, Head of Falls, a work of historical fiction set in the Maine city of Waterville in the mid-1950s, and Water Village, A History of Waterville is his latest work. Thank you, Earl.
Thank you, Dan. It pleases me to be introduced by a member of a remarkable Waterville family. Dan's dad was my good friend and political mentor, so that's very special. Thank you for that. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, I promise that I will stop talking before the snow comes. There is no place really more perfect to celebrate Waterville history than this Opera House, because you see, ironically, when this theater was dedicated 116 years ago this past spring, one of the people who sat on the stage behind me at the dedication was the Reverend Edwin Carey Whittemore, pastor of the First Baptist Church. He was acknowledged for having compiled the first history of the city, commemorating Waterville's centennial as a town. Oh dear. Barbara said I can't have any of that. Waterville's history is Whittemore's history was a collaboration of work of 20 community leaders, each wrote under a separate topic, and I'm responsible for writing this entire book, but I had a ton of collaborators, and I've listed some of them. I tried to do all of them in the acknowledgement section, and if I've forgotten anybody, please forgive me. But there are some people I need especially to mention. Kimberly Linloff, whose idea it was to write this book in the first place. It was going to be a history of the chamber. Sorry. Boring. I did do some research on chambers of commerce, and discovered the only one perhaps worth writing about was the one in Boston, which was formed in 1773, and top this, for its first project, it arranged a political protest that we came to know as the Boston Tea Party. So I decided, well, we're not going to do that. And thank you, Kim. Kim has been one of my largest supporters, and that's why I call her my LS. And special thanks to city planner and local historian Ann Beveridge and her husband Parker. Thank you. Ann, thank you. Who helped in the research and reviewed every chapter. Charles Ferguson is here, I saw him, right here. A wise friend and a wonderful copy editor and proofreader. Pat Newell, somewhere, publisher at North Country Press. The slides don't allow me to see you. And Brian Finnemore of the Reddington Museum, who was so helpful in gathering photographic images. The images that were behind us from the book, or some of them from the book. I'm also grateful, and I don't want to repeat, but I just thank, as Kim did, for this evening's party. It really is a party, and there were so many people involved. When I was thinking about having this event here, as I've said, there was some irony in it, but I couldn't help but reflect on the history of this place where we are, because in writing the book, the Opera House comes up many times, because it has always been at the very center of the city's life. If these walls could talk. 5 years after the dedication in May of 1907, the orator and statesman William Jennings Bryan stood here and addressed the capacity crowd. 10 years later, February of 1917, 1,000 people were here in this entire place to hear William Howard Taft talk about the need to prepare for war. And 2 months later, the United States declared war on Germany and entered the First World War. Through the 20s and the 30s, many of the best-known vaudeville actors performed here between the live stage productions. The theater showed silent films, usually accompanied by a piano player who sat here in the pit. I think I'm standing on the pit. Oh, not quite. In the pit, one step back. One of them was Blanche Letourneau Dubord. Her name is on one or more of the seats here. In 1917, she married the attorney F. Harold Dubord, who became Waterville's first French mayor in 1928. After World War I, in June of 1920, General of the Army's John Pershing made a whirlwind tour of Waterville, and that fall, 38-year-old Secretary of the Navy Franklin D. Roosevelt stood on the steps outside when we came in tonight and gave a campaign speech during his failed attempt to become vice president. September 1930, a long time ago now, more than 1,000 people were here for a public meeting. They had to bring in extra chairs from the Reddington Funeral Home, where they began making pledges to raise $100,000 to buy land to keep Colby in Waterville. The American Legion Glee Club sang, and 7 months later, citizens came back here to cheer as Mayor Dubois presented the deed to Mayflower Hill to Colby President Frank Johnson. In 1945, on the Sunday following the death of Franklin Roosevelt, his portrait was placed on an easel at the center of the stage, flanked by a flag bearing honor guard of the American Legion. And Mayor George Doyle presided a memorial service that lasted for 2 hours. 1957's noisy citizens came here to debate a proposal that Main Street become one-way. Most people were opposed, but later the city council voted to give it a try. 1968, the day after the assassination of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., people spontaneously gathered here to share their sorrow. A month later, the frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for the presidency, Robert Kennedy, who had just been in Waterville for the funeral service of Richard Dubois, was assassinated as well. So this is just a sample of what these walls have seen, and we are truly indebted to the people who had the foresight and the drive to preserve these precious walls. You haven't had a chance to read this book, or at least most of you haven't. And so what I'd like to do, I think we said I was going to read from the book. That just isn't true. You can perfectly well read the damn thing yourself. I just want to give you some impressions that I had while I was writing it. First of all, I knew a little, but I wasn't really up to speed on what an incredible place this city was at the turn of the 20th century. At the time of the Waterville Centennial, the Maine Board of Trade, which became the Maine Chamber of Commerce, Mid-Maine, and became the Mid-Maine Chamber of Commerce, called this place the most beautiful city in Maine. And it was that and more. It was also the fastest growing city in Maine. 6,000 people worked on the river. Half a dozen mills, cotton, wool, paper, clothing, stores, ironworks, trains. 24 factories along the Messalonsky, axes, scythes, wood products of every kind. A town center that teemed with shops, 2 or 3 of every kind, a dozen hotels, restaurants, and by my count, no fewer than 23 bars. Cobblestone streets under canopies of graceful elm trees, mansions along gaslit streets, 2 of them named Silver and Gold to reflect the wealth of their inhabitants. Trolley cars in a rail station, sending and receiving more than a dozen trains a day. Gorgeous new public buildings, new city hall, this opera house, library, post office, new high school. It was, by any measure, a most remarkable place. I hope I've conveyed some of that in this book. And by the way, those were the heydays. I happen to conclude that there are heydays still yet to come for this city. The second thing that impressed me was the openness and ease with which Waterville embraced its immigrants. A record of acceptance and assimilation of new people to this city is, for all of us, a reason to be very proud. Consider this. In the last quarter of the 19th century, this city's population, perhaps 2,000, was essentially white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, mostly Baptist. Then Amos Lockwood came and built a cotton mill, 1873. In one generation, this city became mixed with people from around the world. It happened, of course, in all the river towns in New England. but rarely with the openness and ease that was experienced in Waterville. This moment in history captured me, especially because I was writing at the same time as our nation was having a contentious and often hateful debate about immigrants. Reflecting on our experience in Waterville, I find it hard to understand the fear and hate, more so because it almost always comes from those whose families were immigrants themselves. Most of you know what happened here. Hundreds of French Catholics from Canada came on horseback and on foot down the old Canada Road, escaping poverty in the St. Johns Valley, looking for work in our mills. Then immigrants came from the Middle East, people from Lebanon, from the Lebanon region of Greater Syria, escaping not only poverty but tyranny as well, who brought with them an entirely new culture, and as Maronite Catholics, yet another religion. And it didn't stop there. A small community of Russian Jews moved into the North End, eventually creating their own synagogue and neighborhood shops. And in the middle of the town, Irish, Scot, Poles, Armenians, people from many other countries in Europe. Astonishingly, this figure still strikes me. In 1910, 23% of the Waterville population was made up of people born in another country. They weren't first-generation immigrants, they were first-generation immigrants. Not descendants, foreign-born. That's an astonishing number. I looked up the other day, Phoenix, Arizona, Mexican, born in Mexico, under 20%. 23% of the city was people who were born in another country. And what did this community do? It built new streets and neighborhoods, opened new fire stations, and built new schools. The Chamber of Commerce gathered up volunteers to teach English as a second language. Existing churches helped other congregations build their own. The city gave over the Taconic Street Fire Station on Saturdays as a synagogue for the newly arriving Jewish people. Lest we think that that sort of thing has disappeared, consider the outpouring of this community in support of Beth Israel following the tragic killings in Pittsburgh. Third, I only have 4. My discoveries prompt a word of caution rising from an affirmation of something that I've known all along. We are far too callous about preserving reminders of our past. You might expect a historian to say that, but I do know that, and you too, in Europe, if a building falls down and becomes a pile of rubble, they put a plaque on it. And people stop and gawk. In America, we don't wait for them to fall down, we just tear them down, and then we forget where they were or what they are, or what they were. Waterville shares in that guilt. I won't dwell on it, I promise, but I'd like to. Let's play a game of what if. What if we had preserved Memorial Hall on the old Colby campus? The building with its magnificent clock tower, the first college building in America to honor those who died in the Civil War. If we still had that building, wouldn't that be nice? The Greek Revival post office at the tip of Main Street was one of the city's most elegant buildings, handsome limestone, large echoing rotunda. Some remember mahogany trim. As Waterville people are inclined to do, they fussed about the lack of parking, and the Postal Service abandoned the place and built an inelegant, nondescript freight car on College Avenue. What if the parking problem had been solved and the building saved? Wouldn't that have been nice? Massive steam engine 470, the last on the line, a gift to the city of Waterville by Maine Central Railroad. What if it had been properly cared for and perhaps moved to a spur near the wonderful new river walk? Wouldn't that be nice? The train station itself could have been saved. It wasn't in the way of anything. Instead, we tore it down. What if we'd saved that? It had become filled with shops. Wouldn't that be nice? the Lombard tractor, a Waterville invention that forever changed the world. If we still have one, forlornly sitting in a cage near the bridge where no one can safely get a look. What if we moved that to Riverwalk? Wouldn't that be nice? St. Francis Church, Waterville's oldest Catholic church, the mother of Sacred Heart in Notre Dame. It had to be abandoned by the church, but it didn't have to be torn down. Some tried to save it. Too few joined his cry. But if that had been preserved, wouldn't that be nice? So, I say that, why? Because it's all gone mostly, so we still could move the tractor. But we will have, I'm certain, other opportunities to rise up as a community and say no next time they want it to. Because if we don't preserve our past, our children will not know who came from. That's kind of like a sermon. Is this Sunday? Finally, a few thoughts about the future. It occurs to me that if this history had been written 10 years ago, it would not have had a happy ending. Fortunately, I wrote at a time when it could end on a positive note. It does. As we know, Colby is playing a major role in the current reinvention of Waterville as a center of arts and culture. And I do not apologize for the many Colby references in the book. When I wrote Mayflower Hill in 2006, I found it impossible to write about Colby without telling the story of Waterville. When I began this project, it was obvious to me that no one could write a capable story of Waterville without telling the role of Colby as well. Those who fear that Colby is somehow taking over the city are either too young to remember the days before the college moved to the Hill, or they are not brushed up on local history well enough to know that Colby is simply strengthening a partnership that has gone on for more than 200 years. I hope this book will fill that void because it is important for us to remember that Colby people have always served as leaders in this community, its organizations, and its government, that men from the college and the community served side by side through civil wars, the Civil War, through World War I, through World War II, through Korea, and even in Vietnam. That Colby alumni have always been teachers of our children. And that there was a long time in our mutual histories when there were 3 times as many students living in town as there are today. Most important, I think we have to be careful not to forget that Colby is only one player in this effort to strengthen the city. If we give Colby all the credit, we demean the remarkable work and gifts of others, to name just a few. Earl and his family. There is no small community in America ever that profited more from the generosity of a single family in the Waterville area and the Alphon family. That you could, I'm positive. Paula and Peter Lunda, whose gifts grew the magnificent Colby Art Museum with the state's largest art museum, which draws thousands of visitors to Waterville every year. And now we have the very real promise of a modern art museum here on Main Street. Thomas College, providing enrichment for hundreds of local students whose alumni have strengthened this place in uncounted ways. KVCC up the road, the single largest economic driving force of the entire area. Impressive medical community, Maine General Inland Hospital, full partners in every Waterville initiative. The Mid-Maine Chamber of Commerce, and the most ambitious, which has the most ambitious programming of any program, any chamber in the state, and probably beyond. The Central Maine Growth Council, credited with many of the new business attraction. This Opera House, completely restored in 2012, and the home of one of the best community theaters ever. A nationally recognized public library, widely acclaimed international film festival, the new Quarry Road Recreation Area, the center, Main Street Commons, REM, pulling it all together, Waterville creates an ingenious umbrella agency rife with talent that provides so much enrichment every day of the year. Whew, so there's more, but I've gone on too long already. Just suffice it to say that I am proud to have written this history because I know that when the next one is written, God knows when, Waterville's story will be even more remarkable than it is today. Thank you all for coming.